because of our methodology, if a company came to us and said, we want to understand the values that are driving decisions around our current customers, but also around our competitors' customers. And by the way, we'd also like to understand people who used to be our customers, but are now what we might call lapsed customers. And what we're looking for in a case like that is a set of values that work across all three of those Venn circles, if you think about it that way. And you get that little set of that little Venn circle diagram, and you see those values that they have in common. Well, now those are, it's a cliche, but those are your North Star values, because you can align everything you do, every possible touch point against those set of values, make every decision, every strategy, tactic, objective, everything set against those values. You're going to be solidifying your base, stealing share, and winning back some of your old customers because you're now speaking the language that they're listening for. So you can do that without any of those groups know you're doing it, because it's the most beautiful sort of stealth data that you can get your hands on. Your competitors don't even have to know that you know this. And chances are, given that Valuegraphics is such a nascent insights mechanism and tool, that your competitors won't have even heard of it. And they'll just start seeing this erosion and they'll be like, what the hell? Why are those guys talking about this stuff? Because here's the other thing. Most companies, even the ones who've been around for a long time, they don't really know what values are working for them. And they're certainly not pinpointing it with data like this and saying, it's this, this, and this. These are the reasons our people are coming to us. They have some hunches. You know, when we say these things, it doesn't work as when we say these things. So let's say those things, but they don't know why is it those things that are driving people to say yes. If you know that, so step one, let's figure out really and pinpoint with actual empirical, measurable data, what's getting people to say yes. And you go, okay, now we can stop worrying about all that other stuff that we thought might be involved and actually isn't, and double down on this stuff and really put a fence around the folks we've already got, because they're never going to get this from anybody else. And find those ones, those values that overlap with those other two groups I talked about. Now you and I are old enough to remember that line. Now you're cooking with gas.
You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the eMarketing Association Power Marketing podcasts. Here's Kevin.
I'm Kevin Lee with the eMarketing Association. My day job, which is most of my week, is running a digital-first marketing agency that does a bunch of traditional work as well as a result of some acquisitions. Also run a brand, Truth Nutrition, and a nonprofit in the cause marketing category called Giving Forward. Super excited to be chatting with David Allison today, who runs a company called the Valuegraphics Research Company, which is a mouthful, and also explains why he's doing a bunch of different things with the data that he's accumulated over the years. So why don't we start with the elevator pitch, David, about what your company does and for whom?
Sure. Well, the first thing people might notice is that the word Valuegraphics sounds a lot like demographics and psychographics, and that's intentional. It's a word I made up to talk about this database we've built that is a different way of looking at people and profiling groups of people to understand something about them. The reason we do it based on values is because values drive decision-making. That's just a neurological truth. You can't get away from that. If you're human, your brain is using your values as a way to determine whether you're going to choose door A or door B. So we've got this big, giant global database we've built, 1 million surveys, 152 languages, and it allows us to look at any group of people, profile them and say, these folks, you got to push these buttons and they'll say yes. These folks, you got to push these buttons and they'll say yes. So we disseminate this in two different ways. Research, as a research company, clients come to us and say, we want to know what buttons we need to push for our clients, our customers, our employees, our prospects, whoever it might be. And then as a keynote speaker, we use that to customize every keynote speech that I give for the audience that I'm talking to and tell them what buttons they need to push for whoever they're trying to reach. So in a nutshell, that's what we do.
Great, great. Well, to take a step sort of up even one level higher than that is I find that a lot of folks, particularly those sort of new to marketing who may suddenly realize how powerful research is they don't really understand the sort of primary research versus secondary research difference, as well as how you can use some secondary research to form what primary research you may want to do to validate hypotheses that you came out with, right? So you looked into the big data and you came up with some hypotheses, and you're like, okay, now I want to sort of maybe ask a few more questions and understand if people will really change their behavior as a result of A, B, or C, or I want to run a test around it. So how do you find that folks who sort of use your data to get their first aha moment then decide, okay, now what do you do with it?
Right. Well, it can be a sort of cascading progression of work. So the first thing that generally happens is people are trying to understand a group of people in a general way. So client comes and says, we want to understand why our employees are leaving. Everybody's talking about talent retention these days. Attraction, retention, engagement. These are the metrics that companies are focused on. So why is everybody churning out? Why are our retention rates so dismal compared to everybody else in our industry, our sector, whoever we're comparing against? So we'll go and do that work, and we'll come back and say, well, even though you're in the semiconductor industry, and you might think that the people working for you are all driven by this, and this, it turns out that they have an over-indexed importance that they place on the value of, let's say, health and well-being. And that compared to everybody else in your sector or in your part of the world, this is insanely important to them. So what are you doing around health and well-being? And by the way, here's specifically what it means to them, because it's not enough to identify a value, but values all have different definitions for different people. So what's the specific definition of health and well-being for your workforce? Oh, well, we're doing this, we're doing that, we're doing this. Cool. Are you talking about it enough? Well, maybe that's step one. Like, let's elevate how loud we are around those programs for our workforce. And then let's talk about how we might add a couple of other things that fall under that umbrella around that definition for that value. So they come up with some ideas, and then we can go back into the field and say, all right, if we did this and this and this, how's that feel? Is that going to align with that value for you? And you take that same scenario and paint it as it relates to potential customers or clients, or, even your competitors' clients, and say, if we did this and this, which we know align with your values, would you switch over and try a different brand or a different service or a different product? So you can just keep going back and refining until you get those kinds of responses. And what you'll do is each time you'll find that it's a slightly different set of values that are coming into play. Because the more information, if I just said, who likes coffee? A whole bunch of people are going to go, I like coffee. And then we go back out and say, who likes coffee that tastes like vanilla that has a froth on the top? We're going to get a slightly smaller but more precise set of people who are interested in that. Who likes coffee that tastes like vanilla and has a froth on the top that's cold? Slightly smaller group of people. So each time you go out with a refined idea, you're going to get even more precise information that comes back around what are the buttons you need to push to get those people to go, all right, I'm ready to buy.
Yeah, that's a great point. A lot of folks have sort of already at least bought into the concept of personas, perhaps that their target market has one or more persona that they may want to communicate with a little bit differently, right? So depending on what's driving that purchase decision, but they usually leave values out of the persona. Do you recommend that they layer values into the existing personas, or do values sort of belong in their own sort of area of focus?
You can go at it either way. In fact, a funny story. We began this company because of my background in marketing. I have my own marketing firm. And because of the personas we were using and how dismally they were performing. And then I started talking to other people in other industries and going, do these things work for you? And other people were telling me the same, like, yeah, you know what? We do them because it makes the CEO happy. And he has some personas he can talk about and go, we have 3 kinds of customers here. There's Jane, and she drives a minivan, and she's like, so this stuff, but they don't really play out in the real world. I'll give you an example of that. A friend of mine is the chief designer for a very large and well-known outdoor equipment sportswear company. Athleisure is included under their umbrella. And they have a series of personas that he was telling me that they're supposed to design clothes and stores and CX and everything for this particular set of three personas. He said, and that's cool. And then I go and stand in the stores everywhere in the world. And who are all these other people? What are they doing here? They're not who we designed anything for. The people we designed for, like 10 or 15% of the people in the room, sure, but what are all these other people? I have nothing to do with those personas, and yet here they are. So that was what I was finding with the niche that my company was working in, and it was confirmed in several other categories. So personas were actually the basis for me going, there's got to be a reason and a better way. So long-winded answer to your question. Started looking at, why do people decide things? How did they end up in that store, in that room, purchasing that thing, not that thing? And it all comes down to values. You look at behavioral science, talk to a neurologist, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a sociologist, they'll all tell you their own version of this, but they're basically agree that our values drive every decision we make. And human brains you don't get to opt out. That's how we do things. So personas are still useful. But if you're sold on the ones you already have, they're generally based on demographics and psychographics, past sales behavior, past emotions, past beliefs, attitudes, past surveys you've done. If you're trying to drive into the future, using that stuff too much is sort of like driving a car looking in the rearview mirror. Sure, you might get there, but you're going to crash in the ditch a few times before you get to your destination. And you use demographics. And demographics are kind of good to put a fence around a group of people, but they don't really tell you anything about who people are. I mean, assuming that all Gen Z are the same as each other is kind of nonsensical, right? I mean, there's 300 million of them or something, and they're all the same as each other just because they happen to be born at the same, or all women who are Gen Z who earn $50,000 a year. And in fact, our global database of 1 million surveys now, any one of those demographic cohorts, we can look at how similar they are to each other across more than 300 different variables that we've measured around the world, 152 different languages. And the average for any demographic cohort is about 10.5% similarity. So anyone who tries to tell you that men are all going to love this, they're wrong. 10.5% of them will. Men who earn $200,000 a year and have a white collar job are all going to love this. No, about 10.5% of them will. So demographics clearly aren't doing it in terms of helping us understand people in a persona. Neither are psychographics, it's past behavior. So what we all want those personas for is to use that information to figure out what we should do to get those people to do what we want them to do. That's what it's about, right? So if people are going to do things based on their values, then at the very least, you should be layering values data on top of existing personas. And at the very best, your personas should be based on values. We have one group of values and people, and they're going to be all different demographics and psychographics, but they fit into this cluster. And these are the buttons we push for those folks. And we have this other persona, and its value, the set of values that are going to work there are these ones. So in its purest and most powerful form, values-driven personas are actually purpose built for what we want personas for. But I keep running into companies who are like, yeah, but we just spent $2 million worth of consulting coming up with our personas last year, and there's no way the board's going to let us change those. Like, okay, cool. Then we'll just layer values data on top of those things and make them actually useful instead of just, pretty.
Yeah. Well, I had to smile earlier when you mentioned the fact that, of how non-predictive demographics and psychographics are, and the fact that people just sort of love to put put people into these, nice tidy boxes, which are not predictive, right?
No.
And if this year in particular, politics is front and center, right?
Bingo.
And you have the fact that identity politics in particular, they just assume like, oh, David and his husband are this type of person, therefore this is the message for them, right?
Yeah.
Or this is how they will behave, or this is their hot button. It may be completely wrong.
Yeah, it makes me nuts watching the news during the political commentary where they say, according to the latest poll, suburban women are all voting this way. You go, wait, what? All suburban women
Right.
are identical to each other by virtue of being women and living in the suburbs, and therefore they're all doing something. It's just like, stand back and look at that statement. It's nonsensical.
Yeah.
It's some portion of them, sure, but there's going to be some portion of them that are doing something else and some portion that are doing something else. If you instead said to me, I'd love Anderson Cooper one night to say, according to the latest Valuegraphics polling, people who value health and well-being and personal growth are leaning towards this particular Democratic policy, and this is causing problems for the Republican candidates who are trying to argue that point in this way. That would make sense to me. But to say that all women are doing this and all Black people are doing that, or the gays all love the Democrats, it's like, how do we even hear that and just sit back and go, oh yeah, that makes sense?
Right.
Because it doesn't. It just can't make any sense. It just doesn't make any sense. But it's all we've had. So that's why we invented Valuegraphics, right? We need all three. We talk about it like a three-legged stool. You need demographics to describe what people are, psychographics to tell you a record of what they've done so far, and Valuegraphics is the third leg on the stool. That'll tell you what buttons you need to push to get them to do the next thing that they're going to do. So if you have all three, now you're on stable ground to build personas, build strategies, to figure out leadership, employee engagement, sales, marketing, DEI, ESG, all of that stuff that a company does, that an organization does. Even though it's spread across multiple different departments and responsibilities within an organization, it's all about the same thing, which is people. And people are all about their values. So regardless of what the task at hand is, knowing what will get people to buy in and be engaged and be inspired and motivated, it's essential information, regardless of what it is you're trying to do.
So let's say that there's a fourth or fifth largest player in a category, and they come to you and you go through and you sort of look at them, you look at their competitors, and you realize that the biggest segment of the audience has a particular set of values or a small cluster of values that are really important to them. But then you look at the company and its values don't necessarily align from an authenticity perspective with those values. You, I guess, have two choices, right? You either decide, okay, we can't pivot the corporate culture and authentically be those values, or you decide to try to shift those company values and its purpose towards where that larger audience is. So how should the marketer, the CMO, address that conundrum, right? When your data floats it up.
I'm glad you brought that up, because there's a huge difference. And this is a question that comes up frequently, and it's very confusing for people until they just put this framing on it. Your corporate values and the values of the human beings who work inside the corporation are two different kinds of values we're talking about here. Corporate values are essentially, let's be real with each other here. You and I, we're new best friends, right? So they're not really values. What they are is a list of instructions that management would like you to follow when you come to work here. We want you to be transparent. We want you to be authentic. We want you to be collaborative. We want you to be good stewards of the resources of the organization. Those are the corporate rules of engagement, and we call them values. So cool. That's not what I'm interested in. We can play nicely with those, but they're not really the values of the people inside the organization. So the people who come to work every day, they're going to have a set of values that make them decide that this is the place they want and the industry they want to work. Because remember, we do everything based on our values. So what we're able to do is identify the values of the people inside the organization. And they may or may not align with the corporation's values, because again, they're really kind of just rules of engagement. So you got the people working inside the organization, you got their values, you got the values of your customers. Those are the ones you want to make sure are aligned. You want to make sure that when I'm interacting with a customer service rep or a salesperson or whoever it is I'm talking to and I'm engaging with human to human inside the organization, that's where the connection is there, where there's some sense of commonality. And frankly, if we're going to be Machiavellian about this, we don't even really need to know that the people inside the organization have aligned values with the folks that the organization is serving. but the people inside the organization need to know that their values are different than the folks that you're making a product for. What's a good example? You could be working inside Patagonia, and the values of people who are buying that brand are all about, well, I know this, we've studied Patagonia. One of the values that they over-index on compared to everyone else in that category, outdoor equipment stuff, is the value of personal responsibility. So they like to be the ones who feel like they're getting stuff done. They're the ones moving the needle. So they like Patagonia because Patagonia's messaging has always been, buy our stuff, save the planet. I'm I'm paraphrasing for the sake of making a point here. But I could be working inside Patagonia and not really give two hoots about the planet or about personal responsibility. But as long as I know they do, I'm doing stuff for them. I'm creating messages and consumer experience for them. Then that's what I need to know in order to do my job properly. Ideally, everybody who works inside Patagonia is driven by the exact same. They're basically customers of the brand who work inside the brand. That's the utopic vision. We can help you work towards that. Today, if we find out that that's not there, the important thing is to know who you're doing this for and what are the buttons you need to push to get those folks to say, wow, this is the thing for me. This is the decision I need to make.
When you look at a brand that's got a history and sufficient critical mass, like a Patagonia or potentially a different brand, to some extent, I would imagine the research into the values of their customers is somewhat of a self-fulfilling prophecy because those people self-selected the brand.
Yeah.
And that's maybe different than what the CMO's vision is of the next group of people that they'd like to poach from a competitor, because it's, for a lot of these categories, it's like been, a 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 year share of wallet battle. Coke versus Pepsi,
Yeah.
right? One Tide versus whatever, all or whatever. So you're really just fighting on share of wallet, right? And so you have your core customers who have a specific set of values potentially. And then the CMO is like, okay, so who am I going to poach from? I need to get my share of wallet up, and I don't want to use price. Right. I want to use something other than price because, I don't want to degrade the value of my brand by just using promotional vehicles. So when that's the mission, right, and you want to get into the deep data and understand not just your values, but the values of adjacent brands, how does that guide a marketing strategy?
It's fascinating, because of our methodology. If a company came to us and said, we want to understand the values that are driving decisions around our current customers, but also around our competitors' customers. And by the way, we'd also like to understand people who used to be our customers, but are now what we might call lapsed customers. And what we're looking for in a case like that is a set of values that work across all three of those Venn circles, if you think about it that way. And you get that little set of that little Venn circle diagram, and you see those values that they have in common. Well, now it's a cliche, but those are your North Star values, because you can align everything you do, every possible touch point against those set of values, make every decision, every strategy, tactic, objective, everything set against those values. You're going to be solidifying your base, stealing share, and winning back some of your old customers because you're now speaking the language that they're listening for. So you can do that without any of those groups know you're doing it, because it's the most beautiful sort of stealth data that you can get your hands on. Your competitors don't even have to know that you know this. And chances are, given that Valuegraphics is such a nascent insights mechanism and tool, that your competitors won't have even heard of it. And they'll just start seeing this erosion and they'll be like, what the hell? Why are those guys talking about this stuff? Because here's the other thing. Most companies, even the ones who've been around for a long time, they don't really know what values are working for them. And they're certainly not pinpointing it with data like this and saying, it's this, this, and this. These are the reasons our people are coming to us. They have some hunches. When we say these things, it doesn't work as when we say these things. So let's say those things. But they don't know why is it those things that are driving people to say yes. If you know that, so step one, let's figure out really and pinpoint with actual empirical, measurable data what's getting people to say yes? And you go, okay, now we can stop worrying about all that other stuff that we thought might be involved and actually isn't, and double down on this stuff and really put a fence around the folks we've already got because they're never going to get this from anybody else. And find those ones, those values that overlap with those other two groups I talked about. Now you and I are old enough to remember that line. Now you're cooking with gas, right?
Yeah, which all of a sudden became a bad thing. I don't know.
Yeah.
Um, so a lot of the strategy and creative folks who are listening to this are going to be like, okay, great. How do I now bake this into the next version of my creative brief? Right?
Oh,
Because I'm going to want
creative
to give
people
the
love
creatives.
this. So let me give you an example that a creative person, because I come from a copywriting background. So I was a creative guy before I started my own marketing firm. And that was before I started doing this. So I know what it's like to sit there and look at the brief that you get from the suits. And you're like, what the heck am I supposed to do with this? They've just
Yeah.
told me that the consumer are baby boomers who pantry load this consumer packaged good at a rate of, 4 packs per month. And that we have 14 competitors in the space and that our brand position is X. And it's like, cool. But none of that's telling me what's going to make people sit up and pay attention. None of
Exactly.
that's saying to me, you know what these people are all about? They're all about ambition. And that ambition, how it manifests itself, is they want to be the person who is the most respected person in the room. That's their ambition. It's not about money. It's not about a Rolex. It's not about a Mercedes. It's not about a bigger house. They want to be the most respected person in the room. So now the creative person can go, I can work with that. I know how to make this brand the brand that's aligned with being the most respected person in the room. Um, there's a great little story I like to use when I'm on stage about the hypothetical chocolate bar. So I usually have a clicker in my hand. I'm going to pretend this paperweight is my clicker, right? So I'll say, listen, you're in a stadium and it's packed to the rafters. Every seat is full and you're in the center of the stadium. And everybody who's sitting in that stadium, they're all women who are 25 to 36 years old. They're white collar professionals. They earn more than $200,000 a year. They have an Ivy League education and they're married. What are you going to say to sell them this chocolate bar? You're going to say, well, I don't know, they're women, so we'll make it pink. And they're rich women, so pink and gold. And we should get some kind of you're just jumping to stereotypical ideas of who those people are and what they're going to say yes. Now, same group of people. Now, I tell you one different thing. People who are in this stadium, they're driven in their life to do everything as long as it aligns with friendship. Boom, the ideas can begin. This is a bar that's made for friendship, for sharing. It comes in 2 wrapped sections inside here so that you can have one, your friend can have one. When you go and meet for a cup of coffee on the park bench and go for a little walk, you've got your 2 pieces of chocolate with you. One of them says, I'm so glad you're my friend, is embossed in the foil. You can send them in packs to your friends. In fact, get on our website and you can fill out a form and we will send them to your friends for you with a little, I really am happy you're my friend note, and so on and so on and so on. I don't always use friendship when I make that story, but you can see how one value actually tells you what you need to do compared to all that demographic information, which really tells you nothing about what's going to make those people sit up and pay attention. Now, imagine if you knew their top 5 values, how much more rich and contextualized your ideation process could be and the different creative things that you could come up with. And here's the best part for creative people, and I hear this over and over again, because your ideas are based on this data about what will make people pay attention. And the data comes from 1 million surveys around the world. It's more accurate than you need for a PhD. Now you go to pitch. And all of those objections that we've all heard 1 million times, I don't know if I really like that. My wife looked at it and she's not, and she's a woman. And why is it green? Like all of the decisions that you make, you can say, well, you know what? We can listen to your wife or your gut or 1 million people in this database who said that this is the thing that will make them pay attention. It's so much easier to sell creative when you understand what to do based on data.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So there's my Wow. The next question you asked me, I'm going to try and give you a short answer just to show that I can do it, just to prove a point.
Well, what's the most fun thing you've been able to do with your data that was unexpected?
This has just started to happen, and it's about healing divisions within large populations. So I just spoke to a group of people who are leaders of large associations, professional associations. And they asked me to come and talk to them about this problem they're having right now, where their boards and their membership are lining up on team red and team blue. And so they're finding themselves having to be referees with the political climate that's going on in the United States right now. So I was able to get up on that stage and say, listen, we've profiled people inside professional associations across the United States, the ones who are Republicans and the ones who are Democrats. And here's what they have in common. So the next time a disagreement breaks out, get them to focus on the stuff that they agree on. That's the way to begin a process of finding solutions they can both get behind. It's by saying, you know what, we're here's where we're the same. Because nothing has ever been solved in the history of humankind by doubling down on what makes us different. By pointing to the things that we have in common, now we can hold hands and walk down a path and try and figure out how we're going to navigate something in the middle that works for everybody. So that was something that I never expected. And it doesn't have to be about politics. It can be any kind of divisiveness. We can say, here's what these two sides of any issue, here's what they have in common. That's super powerful information. So that's one thing that was really surprising and fun. And I've already promised I was going to make a short answer, and that didn't happen. The second one is how well it is helping organizations cope with AI. AI has come along, and we're not even really sure what it's going to do yet. We're in the dot matrix printer stage of AI's life cycle. What it's going to be in the next 6 months is going to be something we can't even imagine right now. And that's going to just keep changing and a rate of change that we can't. So how do you be a good leader? How do you get employee engagement to happen when you can't tell them what tomorrow is going to be like? Well, you got to double down on what makes us human. And I believe that AI with humans can solve anything. So while we're all focusing a lot on AI and investment in technology and new code and writing and doing all these kinds of stuff for it, we need to be spending just as much time thinking about the people who are asking to use these tools. And so far, the only thing we know about those people are their demographics and their psychographics. But if you know of what's in their hearts, now you know how to talk to them about AI and how to train them on AI and how to get them excited about AI instead of afraid of it and anxious about it and ready to jump ship because they don't want to deal with it. Make this a marriage made in heaven between technology and humans, our shared human values. And now you've got a really powerful partnership that can go out there and change the world in all kinds of amazing ways. So those are two things that have been happening in the last little while that I think are quite surprising and really quite beautiful that we're able to do. So yeah, thanks for that question. It's a good one.
Yeah, I hope that the foreign policy experts all decide to use your data before they go to the negotiating table so that they know how to show up and create a win-win scenario. Because if you don't show up at the negotiating table with a win-win scenario, it's going to be much more difficult to achieve that. And that's true, obviously, in business and politics, foreign relations, et cetera.
We've had two really big public unions use this information as a way to prepare themselves for the negotiating table, understand what the other side's all about, so they know what buttons they need to push to get those folks to see their point of view. Absolutely.
Yeah. So we talked about sort of brands, and we talked about using it to understand employees better. But one interesting industry that has sort of two elements to it is publishing, right? Because you've got the editorial teams who obviously need to know sort of who are my readers slash viewers if they're a broadcast publisher, right? And how do I meet their needs? And recently they've been sort of, I guess, they've fallen into the clickbait rabbit hole, right, to some extent. And maybe they're using research like yours to decide exactly what that clickbait headline is, maybe not. But you've also got the sort of revenue side of the publisher ecosystem as well, which is trying to find the advertisers that align with the viewers and or readers of that. So I'd love to hear any thoughts you've got of how your data has been used by the publishing side of the ecosystem or broadcasting side of the ecosystem.
I've had a lot of conversations in that world. Haven't yet had anybody engage with us, but it seems to me so very, very clear. Let's talk about it in terms of editorial first. You're sitting down. What you're trying to do, forget clickbait. What you're really trying to do is get people to be engaged with your publication. You want to find your readers and deliver great information that they're going to consume and think this is the best thing ever and keep coming back for more. Well, you can do that if you know what their values are. You can say, wow, our people are inspired and motivated by anything that has to do with this, 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 and this, and this. So your editorial pillars, your themes, whatever it is you want to call them, should be formed around those motivating values that your audience shares. And so you're executing on that in terms of delivering good content. So now we go to the B2B side of this and say, okay, now what about those poor guys in there who are trying to sell ad space? Well, now you're able to go out to the advertising community and say, hey, if you buy some space with us, we can tell you exactly what buttons you need to push to get people to buy your product. So if you come and listen to, you want to go, who are you after? You're after those folks, those folks, those folks. Oh, okay, cool. Well, we think you should be on this page around this thing or on this show or on this podcast episode or whatever, because we see some values alignment. And by the way, whatever message you're going to put in here, we're happy to help you craft it a little bit in a way that is going to align with the values of the folks who we know are going to be listening to that particular thing. So it kind of solves that age-old problem of how do you connect both sides of any publishing venture, and whether we're talking about online or we're talking about television or we're talking about radio. We had a big radio conglomerate who was fascinated with the idea that city by city, market by market, we could say to them, programming should be like this. And then when advertisers come to you, you'll be the only station in town that's able to say, oh yeah, cool. We can sell you 18 to 25-year-olds, males, no problem. And here's what you need to say to them, because this is what the folks watching or listening to our station are all about. So say this stuff and you're going to get them. An advertiser who gets that kind of counsel along with their ad buy and then sees it work is going to be pretty hard pressed to go spreading their money around at your competitors' radio stations. So
yeah. What I really love about that statement is it is equally applicable whether there's an agency involved or not, right? If the publisher has gone through the trouble to understand the value profile of their viewers and or readers, because their internal branded content team, which is going out there and in many cases sort of circumventing the agency, like going directly to the client and saying, hey, we've got the folks you need. Now they can say, we've got the folks you need and we know exactly what to tell them. So forget the agency. Or you could then let the agency know, oh, by the way, we think you're so great creatives.
Yeah, go to them and say, hey, agency, we're buying space over here and it needs to be about this, this, and this. So let's see some stuff.
So it could either be like a win-win-win triangle, or, in the case of the publishers, if they do choose to use that information to allow their editorial teams to essentially become the creative teams within their branded content divisions, it could really create a win-win. And obviously they're all fighting for yield. And I feel badly for a lot of these broadcasters and publishers because they're just barely scraping by, right? So the CPMs and RPMs that they get are just, forcing them to do layoffs and readjust their entire business models. And so to the extent that having that value data and allowing it to get them to justify a higher price from the advertiser creates a win-win.
Well, it makes you a unique entity because no one else will be offering that. Everyone else is offering you, oh, you're the ad buyer for a big agency. Let's go have a fancy lunch. I mean, like there's all kinds of things that you use to differentiate yourself from the other folks in the market. But nobody else is offering this stuff. I can go into a long-winded explanation of how we arrived at this number, but it's 8 times more effective than using demographics and psychographics alone. So your $1 budget will feel like an $8 budget. And even if that's half wrong, which it isn't, and it only feels like it's a $4 budget instead of a $1 budget, even if it doubles the efficiency of your, so there's that. And it is unique and innovative and different, and it cuts down on the arguing and back and forth about what's right and what's wrong. There's no reason to not do it except this. This is what we keep running up against in that whole sector. Agencies, media, anyone whose job has been trying to reach people, there's people inside those organizations who don't want this because their power is, I'm the customer whisperer. I know what our people want. I've been doing this for 35 years. I can tell you, I don't need no stinking data to tell me how I need to. So I run into those people all the time. People inside organizations like, this is fascinating. Oh my God, everyone's going to love this. And then it goes up and some VP somewhere is like, we already know. We don't need that. We already know what's going to work. And they're just like, they don't want it to become something that's not about their gut. They want it to stay there because then that gives them the ability, and sometimes there's several people inside the organization. They don't want this to become another metric. They want this to be where the magic still lies. But the magic can still be there because all our data can say to you is it has to be about ambition, and ambition is about being the most respected person in the room. You can do that in all kinds of really cool, amazing, creative, magical ways. It's not writing headlines for you. It's not actually developing the message and the strategy behind that. It's just saying it should be in this universe. And now you get to be creative and hear and know that it's going to work instead of it being a bit of a crapshoot.
Well, those people, are still using the handsaw, and the circular saw guy next door has a different tool in his tool chest. So we'll need to make sure that the folks where that kind of resistance is, because inertia is the biggest killer of innovation within these gigantic organizations, right?
Love that line. Inertia is the biggest killer of innovation. That's a great line.
Yeah. And so and sometimes the inertia is huge. I mean, it's, you really feel like you're trying to steer a tanker. You're like, it's just really hard to change the direction.
And you need to get like 2,000 people inside that organization to all go, okay. And you're talking about herding cats. Like that's a lot of people who need to be able to put some political, small c, small p, political capital on the table and say, let's go in a different direction. That's a lot of will that has to be summoned in order to change when they're these big companies.
So final question, what should we have covered in our conversation today that we didn't cover?
Here's something. People might be wondering, this is all fine, but how do I do this without you, David? And there's two answers to that, because my mission and vision and values are about getting as many people in the world as possible to start using values to understand each other, because there's a way better way than what we're doing right now. And if enough of us end up using values to understand each other, we're going to make the world a more values-driven, inclusive, diverse, happy, harmonious place and get rid of some of this fighting and this divisiveness that we got going on in the world right now. So there's two different ways you can do this without me. The first one is to buy a copy of my book, which sounds like a plug, but anybody who's ever put a book up on Amazon knows you made about $1 a copy. So, sure, I might make $1 if you buy a copy of my book. But the reason I'm plugging the book is there's a 15-question quiz in there. And while it's not as accurate as having me come and do a keynote for you based on data or hiring us to do a profile for you, at least that quiz and the corresponding information in the book that is there for you once you get your quiz results back, at least it's getting you started going down the road of using values to understand people. I like to say it's like playing the values piano. Like, at least you're on the right instrument. You might be banging on it with your fists right now. It's not the super accurate, beautiful version that we can get from a full data profiling, but at least you're on the right instrument. You're not using that broken demographic cello over in the corner there with no strings on it that doesn't really work for anybody. So that's number one. The book's called The Death of Demographics. I'm sure we'll put a link in the thing here somewhere. You can get it on Amazon. And thank you for your $1. And then the second way is to use what we call the 3 telltale questions. And I'll give you these questions right now. It's absolutely free. All you got to do is take on the responsibility of asking these questions as often as possible for as long as possible and listening for patterns in the noise. The responses are long answer responses. And so you got to listen and you got to be able to go, you know what? They're kind of saying the same thing as those folks and those folks. And so you start to see themes in the answers, and those themes are people's values bubbling up to the surface. And we've tested this now around the world with all kinds of industry categories, B2B, B2C. It never fails to get people to start surfacing what their values are. But the onus is on you to use these. You got to ask them a lot, and you got to be listening for where the similarities are. So first question, why do you go to work? People will tell you it's because it's my creative outlet. It's because where my friends are. It's because I'm making a difference in the world, because I need to pay my bills, because I want my family to have a better life. And so those are reasons we do this thing that consumes 8 to 10 hours a day of our life. And because we only make decisions based on our values, why you're doing it is because of some set of values that aligns with. Second question, you've just won the lottery. Why would you give away half of your lottery winnings? Not who would you give it to, but why would you do that? And the third question, my favorite, you get to say one thing to yourself from 10 years ago. What one thing would you say? And more important, why would you say that thing? So you see the pattern here. It's like, why would you make this monumental decision? Why would you make that monumental decision? Why would you make that monumental decision? That's getting people to get to that why. Simon Sinek's, multi-million-dollar award-winning single word platform, why, and listening to what people have to say. And then collecting all of that and saying, okay, the people that we've been asking these questions of, they're responding in similar ways. And here's what we're seeing as the themes, and those are their values. And then you just start driving everything you can towards aligning with those values, and you're on your way.
Excellent. A lot to take in, a lot to chew on, a lot to think about from the perspective of a values-based framework on research. So thanks so much for joining me on the podcast.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me over.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in The Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.